Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. All right, well, as the weather is starting to change, that means motorcycles are getting ready to come out. And every year we try to take at least one episode and really talk about motorcycle issues and this preseason checks and things you ought to do. Jeff, good to see you again. I know you've been an avid motorcyclist for many, many years.
Yes, I've ridden motorcycles the majority of my adult life, and even before my adult life began, I rode motorcycles. Good to see you again, Jim.
Absolutely. So let's kind of do this. And as a personal injury attorney, I mean, yes, you handle car wrecks. Yes, you handle large trucking collisions. But you also handle motorcycle accidents. And unfortunately, you've seen a lot of these in terms of the clients you've represented. And sometimes if you kind of hope that maybe if they'd have done a few things differently in the preseason as we build up and get ready to get back out there, maybe it would have made a difference. So I love the fact that each year you actually dedicate an episode to this topic.
I do. Because I've ridden a motorcycle for most of my adult life from that standpoint, and riding motorcycles is something I've always enjoyed doing. And I try to do a segment every year on motorcycle safety because the injuries I see when I represent motorcyclists are usually very, very severe. Usually the same speed collision between a car and a motorcyclist versus a car and another car, you're going to see the motorcyclist have much greater injuries than an occupant of a car is going to have. And so I would prefer to avoid those if we can. And, so I do talk about motorcycle safety and things you ought to do when you first get out on the road. But frankly, the biggest factor, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is not the motorcyclist conduct. It's normally the conduct of the other driver. In my 32 years of representing motorcyclists, and even longer than that, riding a motorcycle, it's rare that the motorcyclist is the one who causes the collision.
Right. Well, let's do this. We're going to kind of take this in stages, but let's talk about the equipment first. Again, that bike has probably been sitting in the barn or sitting in the garage for most of the winter. Right. So there's a few things you probably want to take a look at and just make sure everything's in good working order. Exactly.
Before you get out on the bike, that's a good thing to do is to give the bike a good once over, make sure everything is working the way it's supposed to be working, everything is functioning properly. You want to check your tires, make sure that the tire pressure is good before you get out on the roadway. Tires sitting through the wintertime with the temperature getting cold and all, they can deflate even without looking like they're under, the pressure's too low in them. They can be under pressure and need to be increased before you get out on the roadway. Making sure the brakes are in good working order and are functioning properly. From that, check your lights. That's something and when I was younger, I was guilty of doing it, getting on my bike and taking off without making sure everything was functioning properly. The older you get, the more you think about safety. And with my chosen career path, I think about safety much more than I probably would have if I didn't choose this career path. But make sure your brake lights are functioning correctly. Make sure your headlight is there. The headlight is it's a very integral part of the safety features for a motorcycle. The motorcycle's headlight is on. As soon as the key turned on, that headlight is supposed to be on. And even during daylight, you want that headlight should be operating at all times. And the reason for that, or one of the reasons for that, is that when a car or somebody else is looking down the road, they will spot that headlight shining easier and quicker than they're going to spot your motorcycle itself if you didn't have a headlight.
Yeah, it's such a narrow profile to begin with compared to a car that takes up most of the lane, right?
Exactly. And even during the daylight hours, that headlight being turned on stands out and it's spotted. And so it's a huge safety feature to make sure that headlight is functioning and make sure your blinkers are functioning correctly as well. because obviously if you're getting ready to slow to make a turn, same with the brake lights, you don't want a car running into the rear end of you. You want them to see that from there. And then, give your helmet a once over. Not likely it's gotten any problems, but if you, depending on where you've had the helmet setting at, it could have some issues that may need to be addressed, may need to be replaced from that. So give that a once over. Check, before you get out on it, check your fluids and all of that. That's not as much of a safety feature, but you don't want to oil be low and get out and all of a sudden you engine burn up on you or lock up on you because you do that. So make sure you check all of those things over before you get back out on the road that first time.
Well, I know you talked about the air pressure in the tires, but most of us do tend to procrastinate, and maybe those tires, maybe the tread's worn down lower than it needs to be. Maybe we kind of put it off for a couple of years, thinking, well, I'll get to it next season. Well, this is a prime time to look at it. Make sure you don't have any dry rot. Make sure the treads are good. So again, it's hard enough out there.
Absolutely,
little things like that can go a long way.
Absolutely, make sure the tire tread and everything is good on the bike. You may be different than me and be fine with riding a motorcycle with slicks. I would not want to do that at all, and I don't think you really want to do that either. So if your motorcycle tires are, if you think, it may go for a little bit longer before I have to replace them, go ahead and replace them. Your safety and not being injured is much more important than getting another 1,000 miles, 2,000, or even 5,000 out of the tires.
Or 500.
Or 500. Yeah,
Exactly. Now, so let's transition away from equipment, and we'll kind of go into the driver. Some tips for the average biker. It's been a while probably since you've been on the bike, so there are a few things you might want to look at from muscle memory, and also just to get the reaction time's going to be off.
Exactly, and I do recommend. And I'm sure we got people who listen to this podcast are much better at operating a motorcycle than I am. But if you haven't been on your bike in a while, at least in my opinion, you should, kind of, especially where we live at here in Calloway County, where I live, in Western Kentucky, it's more of a rural area. Kind of stay on the rural roads and get your sea legs, so to speak, under you. It doesn't take long to do that, but the first ride, make sure you do that a little bit before you go get out going 70 mile an hour on the interstate with a lot of other traffic around, or going around a lot of curves. Just kind of get used to the bike and how it maneuvers when it turns. It's nearly every one of us has probably experienced the situation that you get in a vehicle you haven't driven in a while, or you don't drive very often, and you're used to driving another vehicle, and the brakes are be either not as sensitive as the brakes in the vehicle you drive all the time, or much more sensitive, and it takes a while to get used to that. If you haven't been on your bike for a few months, it's going to be the same way. Get used to how fast the brakes are working, how sensitive they are, and it just makes a good sense, in my opinion.
And all of this is about, again, just preventing the accident down the road. I mean, these are little things that it doesn't take long to do it, like you said. I mean, that kind of comes back. But again, just discipline yourself to take just part of an afternoon and just go tool around and just kind of go, okay, I've got this. And
it don't take long to get back used to it, get back in the groove. As the saying goes, you learn to ride the bike, you always know how to ride the bike. And with a motorcycle, it's similar, but you've got to get back into that groove, in my opinion, and it's just much safer to do it that way and get used to the bike again before you start making any quick maneuvers with it.
Yeah, I think so. So you alluded to this toward the beginning of the episode, and it was talking about the other drivers. And again, you made a good point as we were preparing for this. They haven't seen you on the road in a while. They haven't seen a lot of motorcycles on the road in a while. So now they're also trying to get used to it. And so there's some things you probably, as a motorcyclist, need to remind yourself of.
Absolutely. When you're exactly, especially this time of the year when you're first getting out there, the other drivers, if they come up to a stoplight or stop sign and they're getting ready to pull out, turn, whatever, and they look and they may not see you. They're not used to looking for a motorcycle at this point in time. And you may have the right of way and should be able to go through without any problems whatsoever, but you're the one who's going to pay the price if that vehicle pulls out in front of you because they didn't see you. So give yourself a little more room. You see a car come up to a stop sign, and you're going to, even though you have the right of way, you might want to keep an eye on that, let off the gas a little bit, get ready to have to hit the brakes, maybe even heavily if they pull out in front of you. Make sure they see you and they stay stopped. And then once you notice that, go right on through. And it's not that you don't have the right of way, but you're the one whose leg's going to be broken.
Yeah, you're going to lose in that situation.
You're going to be the one who pays the physical price for that. And while I can recover money for you, the money doesn't replace your health. And so that's, you need to, I'd much prefer you didn't have the accident to start with.
Absolutely. There's too much good times ahead of us. And it's, again, it's not your fault. It's the other person's fault, but you might have had a chance to avoid it.
Yes, and it's the same way with making a turn in front of a car coming. You may think you got plenty of room right now, but they're not looking, and they may not spot you like they should spot you. And so you just be a little careful. Maybe make sure you got a little extra room when you're making some maneuvers like that.
It's so funny. I mean, everybody tends to want to blame the motorcycles. Well, you should have done this. You should no. Most of the time, and you've done this for 32 years. I mean, I dare say a lot of the claims and a lot of the cases you've taken on, it was somebody turning left in front of a bike. It was somebody pulling out of a driveway or pulling out of through an intersection and just wasn't looking.
Yes, in my 32 years, I'm going to say it's probably 1% or less of the people involved in a motorcycle wreck that's came in to talk to me that I thought the motorcyclist was the primary person at fault in the wreck. It's a rare occurrence from what I see. And it just, most of the time it's inattention of the person operating a car or other motor, car, truck, something of that nature.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I like doing this episode with you is because you actually ride motorcycles. I mean, you've got the experience. You've been on the road. You've been in close calls yourself. You understand this. And I think if you're going to work with somebody who's coming in to talk about a motorcycle collision, you understand it. And I just think that perspective can be helpful.
I do believe that perspective helps me understand what my client was going through and what my client experienced, and why my client takes the actions they take, and it makes it easier for me to explain it to, if we have to go to a jury, to explain it to a jury or explain it to an insurance adjuster, because a lot of times I've taken those same evasive actions that the client's taken.
It's not just theory.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, let's transition now to insurance issues. This is something that, again, we're still pre-season. These are some good opportunities for you. And first thing you might want to do is pull out the policy and just kind of review your policy. Do you have enough coverage? And, things may have changed. Maybe you've got married. Maybe you've got some kiddos now. And maybe it's time to think about, I'm going to need a little bit more coverage this year.
Exactly. And when you do need to, first thing you need to look at is make sure your insurance coverage is up to date. And it is applicable. I know I haven't done this in a long time, but several years ago, I don't know if they still write it this way or not, but when I was younger, you could get a 9-month policy instead of a full year policy. I don't do that anymore, but if you do that, you need to make sure you're in the period that your coverage is going to be. You're going to have coverage. You don't want to be out there on the roadway and your policy not kick in until April 1st, and when you thought it was already kicked in. And then but even if you have a year policy, make sure you've got that you paid the last premium and everything's up to date on it. But check your coverage. And with a motorcycle, obviously there's mandatory coverage that's the same. Some of them are the same as that you have for any other motor vehicle. You've got to have a liability coverage. You've got to have uninsured motorist coverage, property damage coverage on your vehicle, on your motorcycle. But the limits are an issue from that standpoint, and you want to look at those limits, and then you want to look at the coverage that are optional for a motorcycle that's mandatory for a car, and that's the PIP coverage that we've talked about several times in other episodes about what PIP coverage is, and that what pays your medical and lost wages if you're in an accident. And the vehicle you're in or on at the time of the accident is the one that pays. So if you're in a motorcycle collision, it's the other person's fault. Your motorcycle insurance is going to pay for the first 10,000 at minimum if you've got the coverage of lost wages and medical bills. But if you don't, that's optional coverage in Kentucky for a motorcycle. And so if you don't purchase that coverage, then what happens is you lose the right to recover that first 10,000 of medical and or lost wages. It's not that somebody else pays it; you lose the right to recover it because you chose not to purchase that additional that PIP coverage from that standpoint.
And that PIP coverage, that's also no fault coverage. We call it no fault. PIP stands for personal injury protection, I guess. So you've got a lot of different names it's called, but again, for a motorcyclist in Kentucky, it's not like car insurance. You have to actively say, yes, I want this, and therefore pay for it.
And you've got to let the agent know that you want that coverage. They should ask you. In Kentucky, and you got to make sure you're getting the right coverage because on a motorcycle you can get what's called passenger PIP, which covers a passenger on your vehicle, and if you got a passenger riding with you and you're in a collision, the passenger's first 10,000 of medical bills and or lost wages are going to be covered under your insurance there, but yours is not because you didn't purchase coverage for you. You just purchased it for your passenger. And so you've got to make sure you don't have just passenger PIP coverage because that's not going to cover you. That's just covering a passenger if you have a passenger on your motorcycle. And so you've got to check with your agent, check your policy, make sure you've got that coverage. And then the other coverage you want to definitely make sure you have is underinsured motorist coverage. That's coverage, as we've talked about. We've got some episodes that discuss that protects you if you're involved in the collision and the at-fault party's insurance isn't sufficient to cover your damages. As I said earlier, on a motorcycle, I tend to see much greater injuries there, and frequently I see where the at-fault driver's insurance isn't sufficient to cover all of my clients' medicals or all of my clients' damages, sometimes not even sufficient to cover all of the medicals because the minimum coverage in Kentucky is $25,000, and if they've only got $25,000 of bodily injury coverage, it doesn't take a lot of medical treatment. If you have to have any type of surgery, you've used up $25,000 pretty much right then and there. So exceeding that liability coverage isn't that difficult for motorcycle injuries because they are so much greater as a general rule, and so having underinsured motorist coverage on your back is very, very important. That protects you, protects your family from financial loss because of a wreck that's not your fault. And it's probably not going to be your fault, but again, you're the one left holding the bag if you don't have all of that coverage.
And let me ask you this. With a motorcycle policy, is uninsured coverage automatically there? Is that all automatically part of the policy? We talked about underinsured.
Uninsured is there.
Okay, yeah, uninsured is there. And I can actually increase those levels, right, to yes. provide myself with more coverage.
Yes, you can. The uninsured and underinsured both are there to protect you.
Yeah.
If the at-fault driver does not have insurance like they're supposed to or is underinsured, they don't have enough insurance, that's there to protect you if you're injured. And so, and your policy limits are important in that. If you've got 25,000 policy limits, that's the most you're going to get. If you've got 100,000, then you can get up to 100,000. And usually, the difference between the limits on that aren't. When you look at it, it's not as great as you would imagine that it's going to be by increasing your policy limits on there. So checking and seeing what your policy limits is a very, very important thing to do, and increasing those limits when you can and are able to do so is probably going to. Hopefully you won't ever have an accident, but if you ever have an accident, you will not regret having higher insurance limits.
I can't see how the math would not work in your favor. I mean, yeah, it's a little bit more to pay, when you're paying your premium, but compared to some hospital bills, and especially if you have a very serious or significant, injury, man, that could be a good investment for you up front.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, we're not selling insurance, but you know,
It's
wow.
the smart financial decision, no
Yeah.
doubt about it.
Yeah, I think so. So let's transition again to this time. Again, it has to do with the road conditions. So we're going to talk about if you are a homeowner or you own some property and you're out cutting, make sure you're not blowing the grass or the leaves or whatever into the roadway. I see so many people doing that, and I've never understood it because one, it just looks sloppy, but it presents a hazard.
Oh, absolutely presents a hazard to motorcycles. If you are mowing and you live on when you're mowing by the roadway, do not throw the grass clippings out into the road. It's very, very dangerous to a motorcyclist when they come across that. They're driving down the road and then all of a sudden they hit grass that's usually, especially if it's very freshly mowed, it's wet and slick, and it can result in a wreck. And there's been motorcyclists who've been seriously injured as a result of that. And it's common knowledge now. I see on social media frequently this time of the year posts about that. Don't throw the clippings out on the roadway, and frankly, if you're the homeowner and that causes the motorcyclist to lose control and have a wreck, you're liable, and your homeowner's insurance is probably going to be liable in that situation. And so, you shouldn't do it because it's a danger to somebody else on the roadway. But if that doesn't give you convince you enough to not do it, it could get back into your pocketbook if you do that. So don't do that. Look out for the motorcyclists out on the roadway. Don't throw the road clippings, the grass clippings out on the roadway.
Absolutely.
And then go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the weather's obviously changing. That's why we're talking about this. So the snow and ice isn't necessarily a factor right now, although it could be. I mean, we get those freak storms that suddenly we've got some snow today, and we're just not ready for it. But when you talk about road conditions in general, I know we did a podcast back there, is episode number 43, that talks about road conditions and road hazards. Do you want to kind of get into that a little bit?
Well, with a motorcycle, especially this time of the year, after wintertime, you see a lot of potholes that haven't been repaired yet. And,
Hopefully you see them.
hopefully you see them before you hit them. But, there's been some that I've seen fairly recently that were very deep potholes that weren't in the road before winter started, and they're there now. I know not too long ago, after we had that really, really cold snap, I was seeing talk on social media about how bad the potholes were in Nashville. In fact, some areas, some cars were having damage to their vehicles and being flat tires and all because of the potholes. Well, if you're riding a motorcycle and you come up on a pothole that you don't know is there and you hit it, it can be devastating to you from that standpoint. So, especially like I said, it kind of gets back to getting your sea legs under you to some extent. If you're riding on roads you're not familiar with, if you've just been on the road the day before with your car, you probably know where the potholes are. If you're going on a road that you're more of a scenic ride and it's one you haven't been on in a long time, you may want to slow it down a little bit. Keep a good lookout for any potholes that may be in the road ahead of you or any other hazards that may be in the road there that can affect your ride and affect your ability to travel from that. Because if you hit a pothole at a really high rate of speed, it could cause a wreck or do damage to your bike, neither of which you want to have happen.
Absolutely. And when you talked about the grass clippings, producing a really slick spot on the road that could, cause an accident. A lot of times, if you're out on the country roads, you're out on the rural roads, you've got gravel roads that kind of cross over the normal paved roadways. Maybe somebody's coming in out of a field, or maybe somebody's just got a gravel driveway or whatever. Again, that presents a hazard that you need to be aware of.
Exactly. Yes. That if you near a gravel road, that you will get that, and then the old chip and seal, or they would. When I was younger, there was one road close to my house where they put tar down and then they come back with the gravel over the top of it, of the roadway, and they used to repair roads that way. I don't know if they do that anymore. I hope they don't. One of the worst motorcycle wrecks I had was because of that, because there was loose gravel that they start where they started beforehand, and I hit that, and my bike came out from underneath me. Luckily, I didn't have any serious injuries, just road rash from it. But that can be. I mean, it's like basically you're trying to ride a bike on motorcycles at that point, or not on motorcycles, on marbles.
Yeah.
At that point in time, and it's kind of hard to stay upright when you're riding a bike on marbles. So,
Well, and I think you also got to look at machinery in the road. We talked a little bit about that in some previous episodes as well. Some of these larger trucks, some of this farm equipment that you might see being moved from field to field or whatever. You know, again, they're not traveling at the normal rate of speed, so don't you got to slow down, give them some room, and just anticipate they're going to slow down as they approach a hill as well, just because they don't have the power to get up that hill as quickly as a car or a motorcycle.
Yeah, that's for motorcyclists or cars, either one. This time of the year, farmers are getting back into the fields, and so you're going to see tractors, plows, sprayers, etc., going down the roadway at this point in time, and farmers are trying to make a living. They're trying to feed every one of us, and so slow down, give them plenty of room from that standpoint, and don't be an idiot and flip them off because they're going slow or get up on their rear end or anything like that. Treat them with respect, and they will get out of your way as soon as they can get out of your way. They'd rather be in their field than they would be on the roadway anyway, and so just pay attention to that. And that's another reason to be very careful when you're out on the roadway at this point in time. So.
Well, and I think if I'm driving a car, there's a better chance that tractor driver or that equipment driver is going to be able to see me. If I'm on a motorcycle, again, I'm just, because of that narrow profile, again, I'm just harder to see. So they may not even know you're there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you're going toward them, and you need to be careful because if you see their blinker turn, hopefully they see you. But if you see they're getting returned into a field, turn left into a field in front of you, you might want to slow down a little bit and get ready to hit your brakes to make sure that they see you. Again, you got the right of way, but you're the one that pays the price from that standpoint. And I talk about the motorcyclist paying the close attention. If you don't ride a motorcycle but you drive a vehicle and you're listening to this podcast, please be very, very careful when you're out there on the roadway. Look for the motorcyclists now. Because they're getting out there now. They're already out there at this point. We've had some really good, nice weather. They're already out on the roadway. And just keep an eye out. Make sure you look closely when you're getting ready to pull out to see if there's a motorcyclist coming towards you. Take an extra beat, an extra second, and pay real close attention before you pull out, before you make a left-hand turn. Because I guarantee you don't want to cause any injury to anybody else, and you'd much rather see them. If you got to take another second before you get home or get to your wherever you're going, you're going to be glad that you did versus turning in front of somebody or pulling out in front of a motorcyclist and causing them to be significantly injured.
Well, Jeff, as we start to wrap up the episode here, you talked about paying attention. Let's talk about paying attorney's fees in a personal injury case such as
always
this.
A good thing to do.
Always a good thing to Let's talk about a contingency fee real quick. I know we've done a previous episode on it, but again, just to let people know, it doesn't cost anything to call you up on the phone. It doesn't even cost anything to hire you up front. There's no upfront out-of-pocket money, right?
Absolutely. First, I do offer a free initial consultation. So if you call up and we schedule a meeting with you, that initial meeting is free. If you don't hire me, you don't get a bill for that initial consultation at all. And, we'll sit down. I'll talk to you about your situation. I'll talk to you normally in those initial consultations. I'll talk to you about your type of case. If it's a motorcycle accident, I'll talk about motorcycle and motor vehicle accidents in Kentucky generally, and then I'll talk about the specifics of your case and kind of educate you a little bit on what the law is, educate you on what I can do for you. But I do work on a contingency fee basis, which means you don't pay me a penny up front. In fact, I don't get paid until the case is over with. I get paid when I give you money is when I receive money on the case. The fee on it is contingent upon recovery. So if there is no recovery, there is no fee. If there is a recovery, I get a percentage of what I recover for you. I do it that way in part because the better I do for you, the better I do for myself. So I've got a financial incentive to do a better job for you in doing it that way. Also, advance all the litigation expenses. That's the cost of pursuing the case that an attorney incurs. Cost of medical records, if we have to have expert, accident reconstructionists go out, the cost of the accident reconstructionist, various other costs associated with that if we have to have medical experts involved, filing fees, deposition costs, court reporter fees, etc. I advance all of that cost. All of that cost is also contingent upon recovery, which means that if there is a recovery in the case, I receive an attorney fee and reimburse my expenses. If there is no recovery, you're not out anything. You don't owe me an attorney fee. You do not owe me reimbursement of expenses at that point in time. I know some attorneys do not make the expenses contingent upon recovery, that you are obligated to pay the expenses regardless of the outcome. I don't do it that way. I don't think that's fair to the client. I'm the one telling them they've got a case that we should incur these expenses in, and so if we don't have that recovery, I'm the one that should take the brunt of that, not my client.
Wow, that's a great policy. Now, I'm starting to see other people who are, charging more if the case has to go to trial. They have two different, rates basically. They've got I'm going to charge a 33% fee, if we settle it, before we go to court, but I might, boost it up to 40 or 45% if we have to go to trial. How do you handle that here at the Roberts Law Office?
I do not boost the attorney fee up if we have to go to trial, or even if we have to go to up on appeal after trial. Some attorneys are doing exactly what you say. Some have raised the rates just in general. Instead of 33 1/3, they've raised it up to 40%. I have not raised my rates; they're still at 33 1/3%. Of the recovery is what the attorney fee is on a motorcycle or car wreck type case. From there, and there is no increase if we go to trial from that. I do have one provision in there that if there's a settlement offer on the table that I recommend, and you reject that settlement, the client rejects that settlement offer, and we go to trial and recover less than what that offer was, then the attorney fee goes up, because if he had taken my advice, we'd have recovered more money for less work from that. So the attorney fee goes up in that situation. That's the only time my attorney fee would be above 1/3 or 33 1/3%. I've never actually had to use that provision. I included that provision in my contract several years ago because I had an attorney friend who had that exact situation occur, where they had a very reasonable offer that was recommended.
So the insurance company said, "Hey, we'll go ahead and offer to pay this much if you settle now," and you felt it was a fair offer.
It wasn't me. It was a friend.
Your colleague felt it.
The one it happened to was a
okay.
colleague.
Yeah.
My contract says yes. If it's a fair offer, if it's an offer that I recommend that you accept because I think it's a fair offer, and you turn that offer down, it's your case. Always your decision. Final decision on that, with me advising you what's a fair and an unfair settlement. But if you turn that down, we try the case and recover less money at trial than what the offer was, then the attorney fee goes up. Like I said, I've never had that situation occur. I have had an attorney friend. I didn't have that in my provision when it happened to the attorney, a friend of mine, but after it happened to him, myself and several other attorneys added that provision to our contract for that very reason.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Jeff, if somebody's been listening to this and wants to pick up the phone and call you, what's the best way for them to do that? You've got two offices now, right? So is it a different number, or is it the same number?
Same number for both offices. I've got an office in Murray, Kentucky, and an office in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, but I handle cases all over the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I've handled motorcycle and motor vehicle accidents all over Western Kentucky, all the way up to Louisville and other areas of the state. So it doesn't matter, but you can call the office. The phone number is 270-753-0053, or if you prefer to use an 800 number, it's 1-800-844-5108. If you call that number during business hours, you are most likely going to have a live person who answers the phone to talk with you. At that point in time, I'm not one who likes to talk to computers, and so I have a live person answering my phone, and intend to continue that for the foreseeable future. So.
Outstanding. Jeff, it's been a pleasure. I know the fact that you personally have ridden bikes for a long time. You've laid down a couple of bikes, unfortunately, so you know what's going on. you have a way of actually dealing with a client who's coming to you saying, hey, this was difficult and I don't think it was my fault. You kind of, again, have firsthand experience on some of these situations, but again, over 32 years, you've seen a lot of them. So you've got a great background in terms of representing that client.
Yes.
Very good to see you again. I really appreciate it. We'll be back down here in Calloway County in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, and thank you to the listeners.
Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.